My name is Jerry Gill. Today is January 14th, 2009. I'm visiting with Dr. Peter Rollins in the library of the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview for the O State Storage Project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Peter, appreciate you showing up today and interviewing. I know you have a long history at Oklahoma State University, but could we kind of move maybe back even before that, and might ask you if you could tell us a little bit about your early family life, where you grew up, a little bit about your family.
Well, I'd be happy to go back if I could remember. I remember the room we're in. Roscoe Rouse used to have his office here. He was head of the library, or dean, later called the dean of the library when I came to Oklahoma State, so it's a familiar location for me. Jerry, I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston, directly west of Boston and contiguous with it. And Brookline was a suburb, very wealthy. In fact, the nickname of the football team was the Wealthy Towners. I think there are wealthier places now, but it was a pretty rich suburb. My father was in politics there, in Republican politics, and was the town lawyer, had served in various roles in the town government. My grandfather was the town judge, municipal judge there, so there was a law. It had been the town clerk, which is a more powerful position than one might assume from the title. But in any case, grew up in Brookline and went to the public schools there, which were excellent schools, superb schools, and I was pretty much a cut-up in grammar school, but got interested in the world around me, and gradually, as I got older, I sang in the Trinity Church choir. Trinity Church is in Copley Square in Boston. We practiced 3 times a week. We sang twice on Sunday, and I had to take the streetcar back and forth each time. I was actually paid to perform this professional service. We also sang with the Boston Symphony and so on. All I'm leading up to is I had spending money, and in the 6th grade I subscribed on my own to the Christian Science Monitor, which was delivered to our door at 3:30 p.m. each day. And my parents were bewildered why I would want this, but it turned out I was very much interested in foreign affairs and in history. At that time, I have one of the, because I love this library, the Edmond Library, so much, I have an interesting anecdote about that. The public library, the branch at Coolidge Corner, which was 2 miles from where I lived, refused to allow me to take out what they deemed adult books on history and politics because I only had a children's card. And I counted that as a deep insult. I think one of the reasons why I've given so many books to the Edmond Library, I think it's over 6,600 now, is because I'm sort of paying homage to the library still, and will never be able to get that adult card. But in any case, went through the public schools, and on my own, in many cases, got involved in intellectual interests. However, in high school, we had outstanding teachers and a very interesting curriculum. By the time I was a senior in high school, I had read David Hume, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Marx, Engels, major figures in the intellectual history, as well as taking standard courses. The last 2 years we were allowed to take advanced placement classes, so I had creative writing. I would called him Gruesome Newsom. Mr. Newsom, poor guy, had been in World War I, had been gassed, and so he was hunched over, and his lungs were a mess. But he was a terrific teacher, and he made us rewrite everything 4, 5, 6 times. And I learned from him, and I've been doing that ever since. Yesterday, so to be attentive to language, how we put it together, how we communicate, whom we're communicating with, and what way. Mr. Newsom and I won an Atlantic Monthly poetry contest as a junior in high school. I won a Atlantic Monthly short story contest as a senior in high school, was offered a 4-year, all expenses paid scholarship at the University of Pittsburgh with a major in creative writing. My father told me that he had the money to send me to college, and he would rather see me on the sacred soil of Dartmouth College than to have me go to another school.
And there's a family story in the
Yes,
tradition
and
there.
there's a family story that goes with that.
Mhm.
Going back to my grandfather, who was the municipal judge. Grandfather was a Teddy Roosevelt type progressive Republican. He was a shooter and a fisher and loved to kill things and serve them at the table. And one of the things he was most proud of was shooting 2 pheasants out his back window one morning while he was shaving, and still had shaving cream on his face. He had the old razors that you strap around. One of his proudest moments. And he and his family would go to Maine in their Cadillac, and I guess in those days, this would have been 1915 to 1920, they'd have 2 or 3 flats in the wind, have changed tires and patched the tires and all that. They used to stop at a little store and buy their equipment. The name of the store was LL Bean. It's a little store not many people knew about at the time. They get their weeders and their hunting equipment and so on, and go out and kill things. Salmon and deer and so on. And there was a mixed blessing when Dad got home from killing deer. We had to eat venison for months at a time. It's really kind of a fun novelty, the first 15 or 20 meals. But they never wasted anything. They loved nature in their own way, and that was fine. Grandfather was a Dartmouth graduate, and he it is who told my father when they would go up there, they pulled a car over the side of the road, and when they reached the upper level there where Dartmouth is located, and he would say, "Now we're on the sacred soil of Dartmouth College," and then he would start up the car and drive onto the campus.
So it sort of set your path for going to
Oh, I was going to Dartmouth from the 4th grade, as far as I know.
okay.
I was admitted as a junior in high school for the so-called early admissions program. And so unlike a lot of people, I never had to worry about college board. I just took them, but I never had to worry about them because I already accepted Dartmouth in writing. The family had gone there since the early 1800s. And it was an old New Hampshire family. There was a Rollins for New Hampshire where they came from on the Maine border. And in 1884, one of the Rollins graduates of Dartmouth gave the school sufficient money to have constructed an H.H. Richardson designed Gothic structure called Rollins Chapel. And when I went there, one of my problems was I always had to go out and stop people from playing stickball against the side door of the Rollins Chapel. Get away from that, it's my chapel. And there were portraits of Rollins family members in the library and other buildings. And they all had the Rollins lazy eye, it's a family characteristic. But everybody went to Dartmouth College, and then everybody went to Harvard Law School, the standard critique. And I know whenever I wrote home to my father for money, he would break out this letter written in 1838 by Daniel A. Rollins, which Daniel A. Rollins explained to his father that he had exceeded his budget when he was at Harvard Law School at the time. So it was a big tradition, Dartmouth tradition, and I was launched from Brookline High School, and I loved the place. And my wife and I go back for the reunions, and we sort of embraced the whole tradition. That's not a place I wanted to break away from and change because it was really launched me in my intellectual career. I think a component of that also, my mother died was in the 8th grade, and I started taking life a little more seriously earlier than maybe other people. My dad was in politics, so I learned to cook. And I had charge accounts at various restaurants in town. We'd go to a good restaurant, just charge the meal, and go home and do my homework. Usually did from 3 to 6 hours of homework a night. And even when I was playing sports and varsity sports.
3 to 6 hours, Peter?
Yeah.
Wow.
Sometimes you get in an hour in the study hall in school, which I would use for doing the homework. But and go to bed around 1 a.m. And so I really got into the academic work. The most illuminating moment, I know you were asking about this in the exchanges we had, as a freshman in high school during the spring break. I think I was running spring track. I was never very good. I found out why. I got an excuse why. I have a congenital defect in my heart that doesn't allow the blood to flow as fast as it ought to or wants to. Bicuspid aortic valve. But it's supposed to have 3 as far as it only has 2. Having it operated on next month or so. But in any case, went home from spring track, walked home about 4 or 5 miles with my friends, and we'd all break off at various points and throw open the windows in my bedroom. Had a leather chair and a footstool, and I had to do 4 book reports for Mrs. Triska of English. And I remember the books that I read. I remember the excitement of reading them. I remember the excitement of sitting there with my feet up, breeze, had 2 windows in my bedroom, breeze blowing through. And it was just a wonderful feeling. I'm traveling in space and time, intellectually. And I thought to myself, I wonder if you could ever get paid for doing something like this. So that's an illumination. The books that I remember to have read that in that 10-day period, I've written the reports, were Red Badge of Courage, which came in a lovely paperback, 25 cents in those days. The Cruel Sea, World War II. The Bridge at Saint Louis Ray, which is sort of a classic. The teacher was very confused why I would like such a book. And I've forgotten the 4th one. I've suppressed the 4th one. But in any case, I didn't get the reviews on the internet. I actually wrote them myself. It was a wonderful experience. And so that was just sort of an example of what Brookline High School did for me and did for many other people. There are a lot of our graduates who are prominent in the arts and the humanities, and one of them's the owner of the New England Patriots and all that good stuff. But in any case, and there are people who are picked to be the greatest achievers and all, and the most intellectual, and I'm proud to say that I've published about 12 more books than the one who was the most bright. But be that as it may, who's counted. So Brookline was a great launching point, Brookline High School. And then I went on to Dartmouth College.
Could you share a little bit about your experience at Dartmouth and
Yes.
then pick up maybe Harvard after that, about
Right.
not only academic, but maybe your student life and outside activities,
Yeah,
things that influenced you?
Well, I do want to say at Dartmouth, the library was very good and useful, open stacks approach, like OSU. And professors were good. There was a Dartmouth Film Society, which is famous. And so those were all good influences. Teachers were great. Dartmouth at that time was always looking for the scholar athlete, someone who excelled in sports and academics. And they found a lot of them. I don't mind locker rooms. That's a good place to take a shower and have a few laughs, get dressed and leave, but I do mind the locker room atmosphere all day long. And Dartmouth had too much of that, and I after the first year I said, well, everybody hates school the freshman year, so I'll give it another year and see what happens. Well, I still didn't like it, and I met someone, the Dartmouth, of course this is an individual report, other people have other reports. The Dartmouth English department had what was called the new criticism approach to literature, was the text only, not the historical background. The idea being, I guess, that in the 30s there was too much emphasis on the historical background, not enough on the details of the work of literature. Well, I hated that. I couldn't stand that. And I was taking courses in history and literature concurrently. And I ran into a friend of mine, actually it was in my homeroom at Brookline High School, who was at Harvard in what was called the History and Literature program. And Kennedy, who's considered for the senatorial seat in New York, went through that program also. I met her when she was a student. I came back, gave a lecture. She's far more intelligent and articulate than has been presented by the media, I assure you, and a nice person.
That's great.
But in any case, the History and Literature program he had his own carrel, C-A-R-R-E-L, carried his own carrel in the library, which he shared with others, but you could take you could make in-library borrowings and have the books there while you're working on your
As
special.
an undergraduate.
As an
Yeah,
undergraduate,
that's pretty
yeah.
impressive.
Oh, I love the idea. And I've got an anecdote about getting my Carol here at Oklahoma State when I showed up. I'll share with you. But in any case, I transferred to Harvard and to the History and Literature program to be interviewed and all that. And, my father, I said, well, should I apply for a scholarship? He said, no, I can afford to send you. Let people who need the scholarship support apply and receive it. I will pay for it. However, for the first 4 or 5 months, he wouldn't speak to me because I had left the hallowed halls in the sacred soil of Dartmouth College. At dinner, he would say to his wife, he'd say, Lillian, he'd remarried, Lillian, would you ask Peter to pass the salt, please? Lillian, would you ask Peter to pass the pepper, please? And this went on for quite a while. So he was not improving. My brothers had gone to Dartmouth, so there was a lot, surrounding tradition. In any case, I thrived in the history and literature program at Harvard. Told my professors I wanted them in my senior thesis project to tell me if I felt that I was capable of going on as a scholar in graduate study or not. And if not, I'd go to law school, make a lot of money, and use whatever combativeness of spirit I have in the courtroom. And didn't particularly want to do that. I thought it would bring the wrong aspects of my personality out. And didn't want to do it, but I could do it, make a lot of money, drive around in a nice car, nice house and all that. But so I worked on a project on Orestes Augustus Brownson, 19th century intellectual, whose figures pretty large in Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s Age of Jackson. Turns out Arthur Schlesinger Jr. Wrote his undergraduate thesis in the history and literature program on Orestes A. Brownson. So I was in good company. And that project was a thrill for me. And here again, that's another launching point as an intellectual. When it was done, the professor said, yes, you should go on. I had a dream in which I was sitting on the front stairs of the Widener Library at Harvard University, and a man in a white suit with a cane, big white hat, sort of thing you'd see Orson Welles wearing, came up the stairs. He said, are you Peter Rollins? I said, yes, I am. He said, I'm Orestes Brownson. He said, you're the first person who's ever understood me. Thank you so much. I said, you're welcome. He turned around and left. So he took about confirmation that even Orestes Brownson approved of the project. In any case, then I went on.
A vision, that's a strong direction.
Yeah, you can't get more approval than that, by golly. So anyway, Dartmouth was a good school. It just wasn't right for me. Harvard was a great school, and the library and the atmosphere. I had some wonderful Perry Miller, Alan Heimert, Michael Weinberg was my tutor, a junior in the history lit program, and I just had wonderful influences, mentors, and I had all the, it's like having a car. I had all the gasoline, just a matter of whether I could drive the thing. And it was just a great experience for me.
So your career is there's a lot of points and counterpoints, and I want to move to the first one as I studied your background from the academician to a commission in the Marines. Could we talk a little bit? I think after your undergraduate degree, then you were commissioned through the ROTC program into the Marines, and could we talk a little bit about your experience there? And
right. While at Dartmouth, I signed up for the PLC program, Platoon Leader Corps program. Now, my father had been a Marine officer in World War II, served at Saipan, Guam, Tinian operations. My brother Dan had been in Korea, Marine, I'm going to say undergraduate, Marine enlisted. And so it was family, this is a family tradition I went on with. So I signed up for the Platoon Leader Corps, went to summer camp the summer of the freshman year, for 6 weeks of boot camp. A lot of physically challenging walking in the summer with heavy weights and on your back and rifle. At that point, it was an M1, which is heavy. And rifle range, which I didn't do all that well. I was a sharpshooter, but you had to stop during a rapid fire and reload a clip, and I fire left-handed, which all rifles in the service are built for right-handed shooters. So I had to take it out of my shoulder, put in the clip, put it back into my shoulder. That's time-consuming. So I was only a sharpshooter. When they went to the M14, I was an expert in the rifle and pistol. I didn't mention this. We had a pistol gallery in the cellar of our home. So I could go down there and fire weapons and all that sort of stuff. It's all part of that WASP tradition. But so I was a pretty good shot with the pistol. And that was the 45 semi-automatic 1911 Colt, which is the most miserable thing. His bullet moves so slowly you can see it going out to the target. And inaccurate, so you really have to be very careful. But in any case, I digress. So it was very challenging and dropped a lot of people. And I wasn't dropped, so I went on. Then there was a hiatus till my junior year, which was standard for the platoon leader corps. 6 more weeks, the summer of the junior year, and successfully completed that. One of my first helicopter, I would say helicopter ride, but first carried by a helicopter to an objective. That time that was pretty exciting. It was the old, not the Huey, whatever preceded the Huey, I've forgotten the name of it, but it looked like a Beetle. Good helicopter, but noisy as it could be. In any case, did that, went back, had my senior year, and then after I lost some weight, the Navy chief doing the physical made me lose weight before they would commission me. So after I lost about 20 pounds, those weight charts are absurd. Somebody like me is supposed to weigh 145 or 35 pounds at that time. Weighed 145 since I was a sophomore in high school. But in any case, I had to get down to either 158 or some ridiculous weight for me, anyway. And was commissioned, was sworn in by my father. He was a notary public. He was also a lawyer. So he administered the oath. And this took place, I'd say, 50 yards from where the Boston Tea Party occurred.
Was that by design, or?
That was the Marine Corps recruiting station.
It happened.
Just happened to be there, but it's all part of history.
Wow.
So then I went off to 6 months of basic school, which all officers in the Marine Corps, whether they're air or infantry, go through, and successfully completed that. I wanted to go into intelligence, but it turns out you have to have a genius IQ to go into intelligence. I don't have one. So I think it was one guy in our class who qualified in that regard. But I was so lucky because all they had Marine intelligence officers end up being glorified weathermen aboard carriers, and they just tell the pilots what the weather's like over the target, which is ridiculous. So I had the thrill of being a Marine Corps officer, infantry, and that's an honor which I cherish. Did 3 years. Had a reading list. I just, by design, structured a reading list of books that I would not read in graduate school. General education. So I had the Centopicon, which had been given to me, so I read through that, which a lot of pages there. But I read all of Freud, Marx's Capital, which is like that, all kinds of good stuff.
The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Gotta have that one given.
I love that. In fact, you can
paragraph long sentences and all.
Prodigious mastification of the inglorious tribune and malicious rhetorical tintinnabulation and that sort of thing. Master in polysyllabic language. But in any case, it takes a while to read. Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. Read that whole thing through, cover to cover. Wonderful book, but just wonderful. In any case, the point of all this is that I took the graduate record exam, as everybody does who wants to go to graduate school. Wasn't accepted anywhere at that point. And took the afternoon exam in history. Appearance was that they assume you knew something about one facet of history by your major, and then they would try to see what else you knew for everyone. So somebody might be an expert in European history, and then they'd have to answer, and vice versa, American they'd have to answer. So the test looked like it was based on my reading list. It's unbelievable. And I'd read a history of China and some other stuff. And I knocked the top off this exam. This is unbelievable how well I did. So I got full scholarship offers from Harvard, Chicago, and an offer, I missed the deadline on one thing, but an offer from Berkeley. And at that point, there was what's called the National Defense Education Act, NDEA, which had been launched under Eisenhower because of the threat of the Soviets in engineering. And a guy named Richardson from Massachusetts, who was famous for being fired from the Justice Department, for not, he would not, I forgot who he was supposed to, he was asked to, Elliot Richardson was asked to fire Archibald Cox. And he wouldn't do it, refused to do it, just fired himself. And then a guy named Bork came up and he fired Cox. But in any case, Elliot Richardson had convinced the Eisenhower people to include the humanities in the NDA fellowship, so I got one of those. It paid every penny of my graduate education, gave me $2,000 a semester for anything I wanted to pay for, books and whatever. Then I was getting the GI Bill every month, $350 a month, $385 I think, and there was a Massachusetts Vietnam Veterans bonus. That. I actually took a pay cut when I moved to Oklahoma State as a faculty member.
Well, Peter, let me ask you, kind of going back just a minute, was there any experiences you remember? You did combat duty in Vietnam?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Not when all the details, but just, are there some highlights there that impacted your life, and certainly some of the film that you did, documentaries and criticism, looking at the American wars, was that influenced by your military experience?
Sure, there are things that sort of the output of the, rather than the details of the experience. The output of the Marine Corps experience is number one, learning to love the ordinary person and to respect the ordinary person irrespective of how much schooling he might have. I taught 2 Marines how to read. I got 20% of our company their high school degrees through USAFI. They had to take, a lot of them had to take a history class in addition to the test. So GED. So I was dependent on them, I was respectful of them, and I learned to, just love ordinary people. It's a great experience. The second thing I learned was the importance of leadership. You should be able to take orders, you should be willing and happy to give orders and make sure that they, sixth troop leading step, supervise the execution of your order, make sure damn well they're carried out. And third point was the importance of serving my country, which when I thought I was dying in the hospital, my first heart attack, I thought back, well, what had I done that I was most proud of? And not the only thing I was proud of, but one of the things was having served my country in a time of need. And I suppose the fourth thing is, in understanding what the Vietnam War was all about, what was happening, and then coming back and seeing how reckless an adversarial press was so-called reporting the war, selectively putting out stuff in the worst papers at that time were the New York Times. Boston Globe would mirror the New York Times, but CBS News is just atrocious. And just sort of, I would take the streetcar to school and then get a train out from downtown Boston. And I could read the whole New York Times in that period, cover to cover, just unbelieving in what I read there. So at a later time, I got some grants and made a 2.5-hour epic about the Tet Offensive, which is sort of a microcosm of the misreporting. And then later was able to, because people had seen it, hired me basically, to go to Washington for a couple of years and make a couple of TV shows with Charlton Heston as a narrator called Television's Vietnam, the Impact of Media and Television's Vietnam, the Real Story. Both these are available through Amazon and the Accuracy in Media website. But the point is, I was highly motivated by my Marine background, or first informed of what was happening, what people were trying to do on the battlefield, what they were not trying to do, and then to be shocked and very disturbed by what I saw being reported to a domestic audience, which didn't have my touchstone to deal with. They only had what they found in the newspapers.
And Peter, for the record, you were actually in combat situations going on with your troops.
Oh yeah.
And so
Yes, sir.
you were seeing,
Yes,
battles in the field as it was
Yes, sir.
happening.
Not a lot, but yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Shot at, carrying
Going out on
parts
patrol.
of bodies to helicopters, things like that. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, Peter, maybe pick back up then again a little bit of where you come back from Vietnam and service in the Marines to, then as you indicated, get your grant to go to college, and you did graduate work at Harvard. Isn't that correct? And
Well, I had to choose. It wasn't nice to choose
And what year was
between among
Mm-hmm.
Harvard, Chicago, and Berkeley. I'd gone to Harvard. I knew the library, knew the professors, I knew the program. Any such program before World War II was called The History of American Civilization, named after the book by Charles and Mary Beard, which was very popular in the 1930s. After World War II, it was called American Studies. In any case, I knew the program, knew the professors, Kenneth S. Lynn, Alan Heimert, Joel Porte. Perry Miller died before I got back. But knew the library and said, hey, this is the way to go.
And what year was this, Peter, when you started your PhD?
I started PhD in 66.
66.
Yeah.
You did your undergraduate, you graduated in what year?
63.
63, so 3 years later.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was a great experience. Of course, graduate school is a pain, is degrading in so many ways. And so I don't want to put a halo around it, but intellectually speaking, it was just a marvelous opportunity. Humanity has had to work and to sweat to just grind out the daily bread. And to have this opportunity to study and to pursue my interests is an unbelievable benefit, which I've always felt I should somehow fulfill the promise of that benefit. And I think I have. As far as I know, I have. But I always know that I've got to do it. Yeah, so I was instilled a certain amount of dedication to the field. A joyous field, especially once you're out of graduate school.
Let's see, another one of these anomalies in your career. So we're talking Harvard University now. I've got to ask you, what year did you come to Oklahoma State University? And what influenced your decision to seek a faculty position in the English department at Oklahoma State University in the middle of the country from Harvard?
Yeah. Well, the question often asked, in 1972, how did I apply for and be chosen for a position at Oklahoma State University? The answer is the job market was horrendously bad at that time. But better later. It was better in the 60s, real good. Go anywhere. But there was an interdisciplinary position open at Oklahoma State as advertised in the Modern Language Association job listing. And turned out part of the job entailed editing the writings, or helping to edit the writings of Will Rogers, which OSU finally turned out 22 volumes plus an index volume of his writings. So I came out here with partial commitment to the English department, partial commitment to the writings of Will Rogers project. Professor, now retired Regents Professor Joe Stout was the director of the project when I arrived at the doorstep. And Joe and I had a good working relationship. He was very instrumental in helping me to write clearly and directly, much more so than I had ever before. So I was a very good influence in that regard. So he sort of left it up to me to interpret the literary, symbolic, and other aspects of the writings, and he kept himself busy with a very big job of annotating, validating the details, but he was a tremendous influence on me. Now, just for the record, since the record may reflect other things, opinions, Theodore Agnew, professor of history, had been the previous director of the Rogers Project. And his work prior to Joe's arriving and my arriving, best of my knowledge, has never been fully or adequately appreciated. Although I noticed recently he got a posthumous award from the Emeritus Professors Group, and I think one other group. But he did a lot of work. And the people at the memorial weren't scholars, were unappreciative of what he was doing, how important it would be, but it provided the fuel for the project for the next 15 years. But he felt that he should get it all down first and then start publishing. And there was this thirst to get something out. So we immediately got our 2 short books. But Agnew did a terrific job, and every day on that project, Joe and I and Glenn Shirley, who was working for the press on this, said to ourselves, well, it's a good thing Agnew did this, good thing Agnew did that. So the people closest to the project appreciated the contribution of Ted Agnew, of history.
Well, Peter, who did you interview with in that process? Was the head of the department at that time?
My initial exposure was to Clinton Keeler, who was department head. And I wrote down a few dates, I think. As far as I could tell, in 72, I think he was department head from 72 to 75. Clinton Keeler also had an interdisciplinary degree in American Studies from the University of Wisconsin. He'd studied with a very famous professor, Mary Turpie, URPIE, very famous person, American Studies Association world. And so he was very interested in interdisciplinary people. And I think the administration, Dean Grease in particular, are very concerned that there be a combined history and English input on the writings. So Keeler was sort of the facilitator of this, and I came in to work on the project, teach classes in English. Keeler was a great guy. I loved him to death. Very supportive. Wrote poetry. I don't think he didn't like to give orders. He didn't like to give orders, and he was just, if you can be too nice a guy sometimes in your department. I think he was one of those people who was just too nice a person. But that's okay. That's a flaw that few have, but those who have it should be praised.
Yes, Peter. So I got to ask you, because you're talking about taking the cut in your salary. So you agreed to to be hired, and what was your salary? Do you mind sharing with us at the time?
Well, I tried to think of what it was, and I'm going to say it was somewhere between $9,000 and $11,000.
Wow.
To get started. So I took a big salary cut to come out here, but I'm glad I did. Unlike others, because I had served in the Marines and met people from all over the country, ordinary people, I didn't have the culture shock problem that maybe a lot of Easterners have when they come out here, and I certainly have seen the culture shock and its negative ramifications. I'm not a victim of that, and so I have. Well, it's also true. If I'd gone to Arizona, I would have found the good things about Arizona, or Alaska. I would have found what was good about Alaska. But the point being that every place has its virtues and its beauties. Every place. And it's up to you to find them and to draw sustenance from them.
Well, Peter, speaking of that, what was your first impressions of Stillwater and Oklahoma State University early in your career?
Well, my very first impression was during my job interview. And I have a long moral whole story that I'm handing over to you about that. But in any case, I had given a paper at a Popular Culture Conference in Toledo, Ohio. There was a 40-mile-an-hour wind. The roads were all iced over and full of sleet. You couldn't get out of the hotel except to go to a White Tower hamburger place. Halfway across, it was in an island, not even fully across the street, but got your shoes all full of stuff going to it. And it was just hell, this climate situation. So I flew down to Oklahoma State. It was 75 degrees. Robins are hopping around the front lawn of the business college in Morrill Hall. It was a Saturday that I came down, and there was a George Carney of geography had organized a a music festival, a bluegrass music festival. So I went to a couple of events. It was wonderful, and he played and sang with them, and he was very much involved with that. And I learned a lot about the geography department as an interdisciplinary department from that and other exposure. But I brought my tennis clothes with me and sneakers, and Keeler picked me up Sunday morning. We went to the tennis courts just east of what's now the architecture department building, and it was built in 1918 as the Rotzi building, including its natatorium, and there were these lovely tennis courts with grass in between them and high bushes, 360 degrees around them. And I got to play tennis with one of the great people of Stillwater, Oklahoma, George Berry, the former president of Stillwater National Bank, and one of his vice presidents, Pete Kiplinger. Now, I've forgotten who won, but it was just a great set of tennis. Weather was perfect. These were local people. They made a very positive impression on me. I didn't realize that George was this millionaire, all that, but just a wonderful, as you know, having met him, I'm sure, down to earth, lovely guy, giving free tennis lessons to children, including my son when we were out here. So that was a great impression. Then they had events for the faculty where I was questioned and went around, met people and so on. I had brought a film with me and I'd show scenes and analyze it for them. They'd want to see it. I won't mention names, but one professor had just been preferred over another for full professorship, and there was a lot of static in the air, and I think they kind of forgot that I was there on a few occasions here. They're also worried about the anger, or they thought might be anger between the two professors involved. And so that it was a strange sort of circumstance. But then when we drove out here and came out early just to get settled, and I came out in July instead of August, and moved into a brand new apartment complex, 2001, out on a very empty road, Perkins Road, nothing there but all the fields, a few apartment houses. Of course, it's changed since then enormously. It's now one of the economic arteries of Stillwater. But in any case, took the wrong turn. Well, it wasn't a wrong turn, but I selected to take Route 33. Just got a peek at Langston as I drove through, and then as I was taking a left on 177 at Perkins Road, I saw a mini tornado on a double duster out of the field, churning up dust. I thought, oh my goodness, what's happening? And at that time, and I don't think now, I don't think the southern approach to Stillwater is the most glamorous one that you can take. I'll just leave it at that. So I gradually got more and more positively impressed. So the campus is a lovely, lovely place. As far as Morrill Hall, the English department building at that point, I got a terrific office. The former head of the department had some sort of brain problem. I had to go into a rest home and all that, so I got his, not the department head office, but his backup scholarly office. It was a great office. I was glad to have it. I had my nice Olympia typewriter there, a big office type.
Wow.
Got a story about Olympia typewriters I'd like to enter into the record. My first impression, I brought in books, book after boxes and boxes of books, and met Jack Campbell, who was the sort of the first sergeant of the department, did the scheduling and everything to do with the physical plant. I don't know if you met Jack, but he's a character to remember, and he was very welcoming and just a great guy. Jack could make you laugh under the worst possible circumstances. And so throughout my career here, while he was living, and if I felt miserable, I would go to Jack's office and I would leave happy and laughing. But in any case, first impression, both at the interview period and the moving here, was a lovely, lovely campus. Weather was hot. Didn't have an air-conditioned car at the time, which I realized is a necessity, but we had central heat and air in the brand new apartments. We were the first people to be in them. So we landed well here in Stillwater.
And so your first teaching assignment, do you recall what you were teaching that first year?
The first teaching assignment of memory, I had reduced load because I was working with the Will Rogers Project, was the American novel. And that was one night a week, a 2.5-hour class. Basically, I started with Cooper and coming all the way. I've forgotten what the most recent work, maybe Grapes of Wrath, maybe something later. Maybe
Mary Rohrberger teach that also.
And Dr. Rohrberger taught, others taught it. It was circulated among the faculty. So that was my first class at night, and I was very gung-ho, so I did a lot of student counseling and worked with them on their projects, and had some funny experiences with student excuses why they couldn't show up for classes. And I'll give you one example. I got a call, Dr. Rollins, so sick, can't come to class tonight. Well, that's fine. If you're that sick, please don't come to class. You get everybody else. Thank you. Then I called the girl back. She said, "Hi, who's this?" And of course, she was faking it. And I had another excuse. It was written by the doctor. This girl's so sick that she missed class. So I called the doctor. I said, "What the heck? It's a new environment." I called the doctor's office. Turned out the letter had been forged by his secretary, who was the roommate of the student. So I sort of had a break-in lesson on how to filter and evaluate student excuses. The one that OSU students have used for years, which I think is a prima facie, unquestionable excuse, is my pickup truck wouldn't start. And then I'd ask them, "Well, do you live in a community where there's students?" "Oh yeah, a whole bunch of students live around me." "Well, could you get a ride to campus?" "No, my pickup truck wouldn't start." So I guess that would list as number 3. I learned that the pickup truck wouldn't start. It seemed to be a prima facie, unquestionable excuse.
Well, Peter, what you talked about Jack Campbell, mentioned some names. Are there some other faculty members and administrators within the department and the university as well that that influenced you professionally and personally in your early in your career?
Clinton Keeler definitely, by bringing me in, understanding I had an interdisciplinary interest, scheduled me for things like the American novel, American Romanticism, and a lot of other classes. I had you in a class, as you know, and I've forgotten which one it was, but it may have been Romanticism, it may have been something else. But I remember having you in class. You were an excellent student.
You got a faulty memory, I think.
Well, you're an A- student, if I remember correctly. You had a lot of other things, and you were from history, which was unusual to have a history student. I don't think right, but it was unusual to have a history student in a literature class, and you did well. Yeah, I remember it very well. We were in Marl 202, I think, the corner room.
Ours was a graduate seminar
Was
class.
it?
When I was working under Odie on my PhD.
Oh yeah, with Odie Falk, who was also a memorable.
And, Dr. Berkeley was shocked when I had class under him as a student athlete, as football player and undergraduate.
Sir, I am informed that you are a student athlete.
We were doing Shakespeare and the whole bit.
Oh yeah, Dr. Berkeley was a memorable character. He asked me influence. Gordon Weaver was my department head. I was the graduate coordinator with him, and I had a very good experience with Gordon. Jack Crane, John Crane, was my department. I was trying to figure out what years he left that job in 1988. Went to be a dean out in California, in I think Chico, Cal State Chico. But I guess he was very influential. He's the one who basically got the Regents professorship going. So in 1983, I was approved by the personnel committee, approved at the dean's level, approved all the way up. So I became a Regents professor in 1983, and was so till my retirement. And I have the distinction of being the lowest paid Regents professor for all of those years, no matter who else was added, for all the years. And I know this from research with the Department of Statistics here at the university.
Yeah,
I'm proud of it.
Well, that's just another thing to be proud of, I think, as I recall. Were you the first person in the English department, faculty member in the English department?
And still the only one.
Yeah, had the Regents Distinguished Professorship.
Regents Professorship.
Regents Professorship.
But that's okay, and I don't mind being the lowest paid. Badge of honor.
Well, speaking of some of those things, perhaps maybe could we just share a little bit how you're teaching the novel course, but then could you share a little bit of how your career evolved and fit into the curriculum department over the years?
Well, the English department, when I arrived here, started a class on what it called film as literature, in which students read short stories, because Dr. Romer was a short story enthusiast. And practically speaking, probably a good technique for a classroom. Read short stories, and then they'd see a movie based on the short story and discuss the differences and similarities in the art form, what characters are left out, message, and all that good stuff. And so that was on the books when I got here. And then there was an interest on my part, working in film, giving academic papers and national, regional conferences on film. And the department, as many departments do, went through a series of revamping the curriculum. And at one point, boom, they went to generic course descriptions. And so we had a film introduction of film, film as literature, film and culture, film as an art form, and just sort of added a slot all the way up. And that was a natural for me, and I sort of gradually shifted over into that. Every once in a while I taught a 7 o'clock intro to lit class or whatever, but generally speaking, I taught the film classes. And then we hired a guy named Leonard Leff, L-E-F-F, who was just a terrific asset to me and to the department and to the students, loved by students. And justifiably, he was a gentle, very bright, traditional scholar, BS about theory and that sort of thing, and a productive scholar and an independent thinker. And so we were very lucky to get him, and he taught some of these classes as well. And so we worked together well, and then I think as of today, I think there probably are 4 or 5 faculty members teaching film. And then at the introduction to film, like introduction to literature level, there are hundreds of students taking such classes. So basically, I get the credit for starting it. I merely exploited the opportunity that had already been provided by Dr. Rohrberger and the department to take the department in that direction. But I was ready to go. And as part of the Will Rogers, sort of in a way, a cap to my Will Rogers experience, I applied to the National Endowment for the Humanities for a grant to make a film about Will Rogers and the 1920s. And we did make Will Rogers 1920s, A Cowboy's Guide to the Time, which is shown daily at the Will Rogers Memorial today. I think they alternate with the NBC documentary, but be that as it may. It was the first National Endowment for the Humanities grant to Oklahoma State University ever, and many such grants followed. Later, some years later, I was selected as a Kellogg Foundation National Fellow. That was the first such award given to Oklahoma State, and there have been others to follow. I received a massive grant from the Rockefeller Foundation to make the first Vietnam film. I don't know if we've tap Rockefeller or not thereafter, but I broke the ice for OSU and NEH, and I think I've got a total of 3 or 4 grants from NEH over the years. But others have too, as I guess the bona fides of OSU. I helped give the bona fides of OSU up there at the office, which is now in the pavilion, the old post office on Pennsylvania Avenue, in the same building now with the Endowment for the Arts, by the way, which they were hoping to do for years. And I've got to say this. I applied for a job there as a program officer, was interviewed, and they asked me, what would be the first thing you'd do if you came into National Endowment as a program officer? I said, I would identify my counterpart at the National Endowment for the Arts, and we'd work together. Sometimes he'd get things appropriate. And then I was told, oh, no. We never talked to those people. And they were in the same building, and they'd worked for like a decade to get in the same buildings so they could fulfill the same mission. And as a lesson there, as I've seen elsewhere, certainly on this campus, but in every bureaucracy, certainly in Washington, that it's often that the passion for turf often overwhelms the commitment to the mission to be carried out. And it's silly and stupid, but everybody does it. I suspect I've done it. Although I've usually been challenging somebody else's turf, so I've usually been the victim of it.
Well, Peter, during your lengthy career, you've researched, published, presented in many formats and mediums, including books and articles, media and film critique, film documentaries, media consultant, presenter. Do you have a favorite medium, a favorite role, and if so, why?
Well, it's kind of tough to pick out what aspect or what facet of being a professor. I've been interested in most, but I can sort of tick off a few.
Okay.
I always consider teaching my job. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, it's my job. I'm supposed to do it. I always came into the classroom with a real or forced enthusiasm for the subject, and always communicated my enthusiasm, whether I felt it or not, because that was my job, and I wanted to perform it at the best of my ability. Now, I got into the field of popular culture studies, which was a natural outgrowth of the history of American civilization work I'd done. And I discovered, either because I volunteered for it or because I was there, that I had to get into a lot of leadership positions in the popular culture movement. And that meant that I went to regional and national popular culture meetings every once in a while, then the national meeting all the time. And I was president of the national organization from 1980 to 1982, and program chair for about 3 years prior to that in sequence. And I invented the areas, or even the whole concept of having area chairs that they use. Invented the poster that they use, and invented the format for the programs that they use, and procedures. Little things that people wouldn't think are important, but the fact if you have, let's say, 10 panels on film, instead of having them all occur in different rooms at different times, you put them all in the same room, seriatim. So somebody interested in film could just camp out there, and that would be like their home for the meeting. It seems like a small point, but my predecessor in programming, they'd go on the 3rd floor for this, and the next logical thing, you'd go to the 1st floor, and then you'd go back to the 2nd floor. So chaotic. It was done, I guess, to suit the typist or some other rationale than intellectual one. So I got into these leadership roles, and I really enjoyed that. So I invented this area chair concept, and I was and have been an area chair many, many times. That's probably the most exciting role to have for me, because it forced me to be in discussion with people all over the country, all over the world, about the things that they were passionate about, interested in. And I could share that excitement on the subject. So being an area chair was an education unto itself, like having a seminar across the globe. and I really enjoyed that very much. I believe that writing is important. Mr. Newsom back there at Brookline High School showed me how difficult it was to write clearly and effectively, and so I've been a rewriter. And Joe Stout, as I mentioned, he taught me how to write directly and effectively. That helped a lot, simplify. And so I enjoy writing, but I do not find it easy to write. And anybody who's a good writer who says it's easy is a liar, as far as I know. And I always try to communicate that to students. If you're having trouble writing a paper, getting your thoughts on paper, join the club. We're all in that boat. That's why writing is important, because you crystallize and distill and put together ideas in a format that really bring things together the way that oral communication often does not. So I enjoy writing things down, putting it on paper. It's hard to say that I've enjoyed filmmaking. Filmmaking is a tremendous amount of fun at times, but you're dealing with many people, many sources, many legal restrictions, many technical or perceived technical restrictions, and all these things add up. So I admire anybody who makes a movie because of all the BS that goes along with it. You may have a concept, you may know what you want to do, but that's about 1/8 of the project budget, personnel, location. I mean, one of the biggest tasks I ever had in making a film was interviewing Walt Whitman Rostow at the LBJ Presidential Library out on the lawn and getting the large fountain there shut down for the interview. I mean, that dealing with the physical plant, the safety and security. I mean, why do I have to do stuff like that? But it's part of filmmaking. So there's you really have to cut your way through a lot of jungle to get the job done. So, but the results are often memorable and of permanent value.
You alluded to the Regents professorship, especially earlier. You also received the Distinguished Service Award, the National Lifetime Achievement Award from the Popular Culture Association. Can you mention these and other highlights, milestones in your career that are special to you?
Well, I always felt that I ought to do 300%, and I have been rewarded for it. So that at OSU I was, any question, the most published professor in the English department. No question of it. Gordon Weaver published a lot, but I was looking at I went back and looked at my department heads on the internet, all those I could find, and he sort of tapered off after he retired. But I didn't do that as a competitive thing, but there it was. And so I got tenure first time around, quote, early tenure, whatever that means. And then the Regents Professorship in '83. I was the associate editor of the Journal of Popular Culture. I was associate editor of the Journal of American Culture. I did the first kickoff issue of the Journal of Regional Culture for Ray Brown. Worked with Mr. Brown in all sorts of ways. Was an officer at various levels and president of Popular Culture Association. And I worked my heart on these things, and people recognized what the things have been done, because there's a lot of lethargy and sloth in the world that we live in, and if you are working, you are achieving and accomplishing, you do stand out. It just happens. So I didn't have to do any backstage politicking for these things. They were, in many cases, recognition. Now, why I could never get a pay raise that was more than the 2% salary raise that everybody else got is beyond me. Although I do have an interpretation of why, and I apologize for being a Vietnam veteran to all who don't appreciate Vietnam veterans. That's all I can say. Apropos of that, when I came out here, I had an interview at a 4-year college in Western Massachusetts, and the vice president told me, this is when John Kerry was testifying to the Senate in the 1970s about how our war crimes and et cetera. And the vice president of this 4-year college, not to be named, said, "We don't want your kind around here." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "We don't want your kind. You're a war criminal, one of those Vietnam War criminals. We don't want your kind around here." So that's an ingredient that's gone through the career also. And I do want to be remembered, if I am remembered in part, as an example of Vietnam veterans who achieved something in civilian life after their service. And I'm not alone in that, believe me. There are the head of the American Express and many other business leaders. John McCain, whom I know, I interviewed, he's in one of my films, when he was a congressman. Served his country under much more difficult conditions than I did. But there are many, many who will testify, and I actually have statistics on this in my writings, testify that they are higher achievers because of their military service rather than being held back by it. So, but there are many facets of being a professor and being an intellectual, sometimes what's called a public intellectual. And I've pursued those, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. I've given papers on Vietnam at conferences where the panel has been picketed in Cincinnati by the Young Socialist League, picketed my presentation there. So it's been interesting.
Peter, I'm going to ask you a question here, and I hope it makes sense to you. Ask you, who's the real Peter Rollins? Then there's the former college rugby player, the tough Marine, veteran of Vietnam. There's the critical research historian. There's the popular culture guy. Who's the real Peter Rollins? What's the ethos here?
The real Peter Rollins is the person who discovered as a freshman in high school that through books and the intellect you could pursue ideas and themes in time, that you are geographically free to go anywhere you want with the mind. And I've pursued that with great joy, with the excuse of being a college professor. I mean, as you know, Odie Falk wrote a book, It Beats Working for a Living. Well, I know what he meant. And of course, he was one of the hardest working people. In some respects, as you know from his history, it may be too hard work, or he was too in a hurry. But so when he said beats working for a living, he wrote that book because he had higher respect for the duty of a professor and intellectual than he saw around him. It wasn't that he was lazy and he wanted to tell people how to be lazy.
Well, Peter, you talked about earlier about students and the joy that brought you in teaching was an important thing. Can you share some stories about your experiences with students, undergraduate and graduate students that you taught and mentored?
Sure. Every undergraduate class, or every class, has its own personality, group personality. And some are good, and some are wonderful. Some are average, and every once in a while there's a rotten one. It was important to me to communicate the seriousness of what we were doing to the students. And I discovered first year or two at Oklahoma State that I had to make the humanities as demanding as the business professors made accounting demanding, or the chemistry professors made the chemistry demanding, or that the students wouldn't do the homework and would slough off. So I was a hard-nosed professor to undergraduates, and I have received, my wife asked me to mention this, I received letters over the years of people saying, when I had you as a teacher, I hated you. And now that I've 8 or 10 years later out of college, I now understand what you were trying to do. Now that I'm older. And I can't tell you what a thrill it is to get that sort of letter. Now, one of the things I did with students at OSU was immediately get them going to conferences, graduate students, and getting them published, get them started on book reviews. Book review here, book review there. My feeling being is they were going to get a job. At the end of the cycle, they had to distinguish themselves in more than one way from other candidates for the job. And I I had great luck with that, both of the students producing and going to meetings. And one of my students ended up the head of the English department at North Adams State College in Massachusetts. And I remember he was a candidate. They had 600 candidates, and they had 358. I remember calling into the department and talking to her. This is really a hotshot person, Mr. Harris J. Elder. Pull his thing, take a look. Oh, yeah, this looks good. And they put him on the pile. He ended up being the chairman of that department for quite a while. Recently, I had a back to school. Some lady went out into business and came back to school and got her PhD in English / American Film Studies. She's now a assistant professor at Michigan State. They loved her so much they had made her the managing editor of the journal Popular Culture. And she's had one book out already, and she's got another one where OU Press is interested in the manuscript. And she's just a hotshot, and I had something to do with inspiring her. But once people have a problem with me, once I become their mentor, it does not end at graduation. The harassing, the demands for productivity do not end at graduation. I call them, I write them, I ask them what's happening on this project, why isn't it done? And this can drive them nuts, but that's just the way I am. I had one student, Paul Walters, who wrote a master's thesis on Flannery O'Connor. Good one. Flannery O'Connor and neo-orthodoxy, 1950s. Really an excellent one. Paul, it's too long a story to get into it. Paul had some trouble with a journal up in Kansas, which gave him instructions to change the article in a certain way, and they'd publish it. Well, he sent it back, and then they sent it to other readers, and they said, put back in the things that he'd taken out in a separate set of readers. So he decided to become a lawyer. He's a lawyer down in Oklahoma City. But he, in his dedication, he says, I want to thank Dr. Rollins for his dogged determination in supervising this project, and I want to thank myself for putting up with his dogged determination. That's the best summary I can give of the mentoring that goes on at the graduate level, but I always take pride in what they do.
Great. What were your department, specifically in the university generally, Peter, supportive of faculty needs, do you think, and goals, in particular of you specifically?
I don't know enough about budgeting at Oklahoma State. I always thought of Oklahoma State as sort of a General Motors type leadership, which is things come from the top down, and rather than people at the lower levels being consulted. And that was just a leadership style that existed for years, maybe less so now, but everything was Whitehurst says this, Whitehurst says that, Whitehurst says this. And there's a funny side of that. I was on the curriculum committee my first semester here, and we were picking classes to show, and well, that won't get enough student credit hours, and this one. I said, why are we picking classes on the basis of student credit hours? Who said we should do that? Oh, our budget is determined by how many students. I said, well, Jack came. I said, Jack, who said that? Whitehurst. Well, who in Whitehurst? Vice President for Academic Affairs Office. So I called Vice President Boggs' office, talked to a responsible person. No, we never allot budget by student credit hours. That's a myth. It just isn't true. So they had been essentially picking classes because their mindset was top down, not on the virtue of what was there, how it fit to the needs or appetites or creative interests of the professors, but what would be approved at a higher level. And English had a constant problem with the number of sections of comp, which had to do with the population coming in. That would juggle the budget. So I've never dealt with budgets, so I don't know what liberty there existed. I was always treated as a special person by my department heads, always. like a thoroughbred. And I appreciate it, I never complained about it. But overall, I can't, I mean, the travel support here is miserable and always has been for professors, but I'm not sure the money is available, or perceived to be available. And you get into budgets, you know, I don't want to get into the complaints. But I never made any money here. I had a thrill. This was a great place to work. It was a wonderful workbench. The library that you and I are sitting in was a wonderful place to work from. And what it lacked in books and journals and such, they made up with by initiative on the part of the staff. I just saw Mr. Oberhelman downstairs as I was coming back up, and he's just one in a long line of people, enthusiastic, extremely helpful, takes the initiative. Out of Terry Bassford was a terrific guy in that position, the humanities on, now it's on the third floor. Ken Tracy went out and started his own bookstore at some point. He was terrific. They work well with my graduate students. They work well with me. Since they took initiative. I can't say enough about the library as a workbench for me. So that was a really positive thing. And I don't know if anyone will ever care about this, but having a carol at the library is a big deal for a true scholar, because you can make inside the building loans, and you don't have to take home 400 pounds of books, and they're available at the library. You can go out and pull them out, rent them to somebody else, send you a card and all that. It saves money, I think. But I had one of the early carols, because I caused such a stink about it. I said I was guaranteed it when I came out here, and I don't think I had been, but I said it. And they found one for me, which I shared with some other professors. And I ended up with the last one with Professor Fisher, Professor Berkeley, and I had this last carol. It was a noble brotherhood of scholars.
Yeah.
But I hope when the library goes underground or whatever it's going to go, I think someday they're going to go down 8 floors or whatever, that they allot space for faculty carols. And of course you have to monitor these things, because some people like to work at home, but they still want a carol for some reason. And they don't rate one. I mean, they got to use it or lose it. But it's a tremendous, a real scholar needs that locked place for inside the building loans, and just to leave the sport coat while he goes down the hall, you know what I mean?
Great.
So I used it a lot.
Peter, looking at the history department, how has it evolved over the years in your mind, and has it reflected or has it not reflected national trends?
The OSU English department was pretty much an old school, new criticism type place, like Dartmouth had been when I got here, and that was the fad in graduate schools when these people went through. Except for Clinton Keeler, who was interdisciplinary, and that's why he was so receptive to my whatever talents I may have promised. But they were pretty traditional scholars, and most of them inactive and mediocre or non-existent in their publishing aspect. Dr. Berkeley being the exception. Dr. Berkeley, proud and active scholar and publisher and producer of scholars who published and so on. And so I was an oddball coming in, both because of the interdisciplinary and because of the productivity. That was appreciated around. And you know, it's interesting, I've not seen much of it since, but George Grease, who was the Dean of Arts and Sciences, when I had an article published or something significant, he'd write me a little note. This is great, please keep it up. It's George. And you know, that meant something to me. I'd urge that on any academic leader, take the time to reinforce, you know, like a football coach. Tell them when they do something right, not just when they do something wrong.
Positive reinforcement.
Yeah, oh yeah. But in any case, that was and over the years, the department added things like rhetoric and comp. That is, I guess we'd say the scientific study of writing and teaching of writing. And that's helped to be the composition program enormously. It added technical writing, which for this school is a perfect fit. Technical school, pretty much. Added creative writing, which was a big impulse, and Gordon Weaver was the first major creative writer. He attracted a lot of students, deservedly so. For a certain phase while he was here, he was just dynamite, magnetic and productive, and attracting students from all over the place. And they had subsequent writers who were also good. We now have the poet I guess she's the big headliner here, and she's a very crafted poet, so we still have good people here. We added the film aspect, so now it's become pretty much a multidisciplinary department. That's sort of what's happened nationally. I'm an old fogey, so I think a lot of the new things, probably the way the old people when I came in thought of the new things I was introducing were frivolous, stupid, a reflection of the current intellectual fads. I had the same criticism made of me, that I was introducing. I mean, who wants to study motion pictures? That's ridiculous. Now, Dr. Berkeley said to me once, "Sir, I do not approve of the field of your field of study, but I do approve of your industry in that field."
Sounds like it.
We made a 45-minute movie about Dr. Berkeley, which I have here on CD. So the library already owns one, but I thought I'd bring one anyway. It's called The Best of the Old School. And so he was the type of old school scholar, but he was a productive one. Wouldn't agree with everything he came up with, but at least he was productive and put things out there on the table you could discuss, argue with or agree with.
Peter, what, you've had, must have had opportunities to teach work in other universities and other professional areas. What kept you at Oklahoma State University all these years?
Well, I've been away on a lot of grants over the period I was here.
Sabbaticals and things, or just?
Yeah, supported by outside sources. Yeah, with what do you call it, the skim of the university takes, the overhead. So I unlike a lot of people in the humanities here, I brought in thousands and thousands of dollars. But the point is, I've had the advantage to go away and do this, and in the meantime, bring grants to the OSU. So this has been a career where I have been away. The funniest story in this regard is that I was offered a job over the table like you and I are sitting at Bowling Green State University in the Department of Popular Culture, and literally as the offer was being made, the phone between Ray Brown and me rang. Bling, bling. Ray picks it up. It's OSU, they want to talk to you. And OSU had just gotten the National Endowment Grant to make the Will Rogers film, so back I came. I would have enjoyed myself there, but I've enjoyed myself here, really have, and been productive here.
Is there something particular that sticks out in your mind about why you made your entire career here? When, like I said, you've gone to different places, you've had different offers, and there must have been some attraction to Oklahoma State.
You're leading the witness.
Teasing you.
Leading the witness. I'll say psychologically there's an interesting point. My dad was a lawyer in the same office, his firm, entire professional career. My brother Phil was the district attorney of Cape Cod for his entire maturity once he was elected after the Kennedy fiasco. They kicked the Democrat out and voted as Republican, and he was there till he chose to retire. There's a big portrait of him in the Barnstable Courthouse. My brother Dan worked as an electrical engineer for the government for his entire career. We got a big high GS rating when he left, and there's an example of my family. People sort of said, I don't know whether it's not being unhappy with what they're doing. going and not feeling like, oh, let's pull the roots out, see how the plant's growing, type of thing. But specifically with respect to me, as I said, the library's been wonderful. The department not meddled in my desires to float new courses and teach new subjects in new ways. Never, in a lot of places, curriculum committee has to go, oh, look at this assignment, it's too short. This, your third week, there's too much reading, and meddling. And of course you want to meddle, you can really get carried away with it, as we're going to see with the new administration in Washington. But be that as it may, nobody meddled, if I were to say polite language, nobody meddled with me. And that was worth thousands of dollars. That freedom, that liberty. I mean, I've been free to do what I wanted to do the teaching enthusiastically, to do the grant enthusiastically, do the scholarship and flourish. And I've just had really a gift in that regard. I didn't know at the time, but because I was giving money heavily to TIAA-CRIF, I'd retire, and apropos of my salary went up significantly after I retired. I mean, big time, ridiculous. I have friends who are making 2 and 3 times what I was making here, and were half as productive as I was. And they were in engineering schools, but there they would pay the humanities professors on the same platform as they would the engineering professor. There was no differential, as you know, or for the record, the differential as I perceive it here is humanities are down, and then slightly below the humanities, the art department, and then way below the art department, the drama department. It's an unfortunate disgrace, I think, but there it is. I think the new administration, President Hargis, I think has different priorities. Hope that works out.
I hope it is too. Well, Peter, what kind of picking up some of your thoughts, though, good and bad, maybe favorite memories, of Oklahoma State University, people, places, events, or some special moments that you recall over the years?
Well, I have some anecdotes here where I've written up in great detail and effort, which you might include in the record.
Okay, we did.
But special moments, coming down from the interview, the robins were hopping in the front yard. It was 75 degrees, maybe 80. And I just come out of this blizzard in Toledo, Ohio. You didn't tell me that isn't significant. Getting my Carol in the library, very important to me. Working with graduate students, working with undergraduate students who are serious. These have been very special. Now, any particular moment that I can identify is more of a enjoyment of the Gemeinschaft of the Stillwater and Oklahoma State community. It's less impersonal. What you see is what you get. People try to be friendly. Sometimes they're too friendly. You wonder why on earth this person's so damn friendly. I do. And it's been a pleasant atmosphere. Now, another thing about Stillwater then and now, it's small. It's simple. I don't like disturbing or agitated external environment. I'm busy thinking. And I like a nice, simple, quiet environment. Drive down 6th, take a left, pull in the driveway, watch the news, have dinner, and work for 3 hours after dinner. That's the good life. And a small town environment, and whenever possible, depending where I lived, I used to bicycle or walked. And I would walk at, let's say from campus, not from Moral Hall. From Moral Hall would be 3 miles. I'd walk, and I used my 3-speed Rudge sport bike at other times, and so the simplicity of life in Stillwater had a real benefit. Now people say, "Oh, the restaurants are." Who gives a damn? You know. I was told once by a Jewish theologian that the best place to eat in town, if you're lucky, is at home.
That's good.
I think so.
We'll
And a lot of truth to it.
Yeah. We're flipping this out of the coin. I know a couple more questions here. But Are there been, other than salaries, I know we talked about that, but
Did I mention that?
have there been frustrations and disappointments in your career here?
Well, I think that the fact that I was a Vietnam veteran in the early days that I was here was an honorific thing. As we got more sophisticated, as we got people coming in, new people, it became a disgrace, something terrible. This person could be involved in the military. Oh my goodness. So in some respects, OSU has become very cosmopolitan, part of which, of course, is disdain or distaste or just plain repugnance for the military, which, of course, came through in the reporting of the 1960s and other times. Now, as I say, in the early days, it was an honorific title, but less so as time went by. But that, too, encouraged me to make sure that veterans get spoken for. So as recently as October, I did a series of 6 lectures on the American fighting man in film in Stillwater, the American Legion Hall, and elsewhere. And when they had steak dinners, we had over 100 people there.
Wow.
When they served a steak dinner. But I had groupies. I had some groupies coming to me. And reason why I did it is of course, we've now won the war in Iraq. You may not have heard that, but we've won the war in Iraq. During the war, especially when it was getting bad, I'd wake up every morning feeling miserable for those poor guys out there, thinking of them getting up, putting their boots on, cleaning the weapon, going out. And I thought, well, I bet you every veteran feels that way. So I thought, well, I'll give a series of lectures. When their war comes up, they can come. So, I did World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf War in a series of 6 presentations. And I had a lot of work. I had PowerPoint, I had clips from the films, and it shocked me the AV equipment actually worked every time. Shocking. And so somebody's got to speak up for veterans. Maybe sometimes they can't do it themselves. That's my job.
Peter, what?
I actually became a sort of regular defender of General Westmoreland in print and elsewhere, and had a lot of dealings with General Westmoreland. Of course, he is the whipping boy. He was everything that went wrong in Vietnam was all his fault, according to historians. You're a historian. You know what I'm talking about.
Peter, looking back, what do you feel has been your legacy to OSU and to your profession generally?
My wife and I talked about this. My legacy, I think, is that a professor at Oklahoma State can be a world-class scholar. I did it. My track record shows it. And as I mentioned, I've given over 6,000 books to the library, or we call it the library. To the library. And and each one has a plate in there, gift of Peter C. Rollins. And when somebody opens that book, I want them to say, I can be a world-class scholar too, because I'm at Oklahoma State. That would be the best legacy. The other would be that my Vietnam movies, which are still sold, still sell on Amazon and elsewhere, narrated by Charlton Heston and hosted on camera. That these continue to be used in the classrooms, and they are, to provide a different point of view on the Vietnam experience, and so that the flawed perceptions of the period, which work their way into things like Hearts and Minds by Peter Davis, or the WGBH series, Vietnam and Television History, so that those distorted views of the Vietnam experience don't prevail, that there's a countering voice. They keep using, and my shows are now on DVD, and they're documented. Nowadays you get DVD, you put it in your computer, and you can have PDF files with articles and readings, and also they have that, a 30-minute lecture by me on the programs. And this is selling. Now, it's selling like crazy, but I mean, it's selling. And teachers use this. So that'll be an important legacy too.
Peter, what sort of tie onto that question is how do you hope people remember Peter Rollins?
How people remember Peter Rollins depends who the person is and where he was in his life cycle. I've told you I had a number of students who've written to me 5, 8, 10 years after they left OSU saying, I hated you. I didn't know why you acted like that in class, and now they're out in the working world. I understand why you made such demands of us. I tried to make those demands on my people working with me, and they don't understand just like I didn't understand. So that's, for undergraduates, I think there's a lot of that. I said because of the boot camp mentoring attitude, which continues long after they graduated, the graduate students, they will remember me as a demanding setter of standards. What they don't know is I have people setting, and still do every day, setting standards for me in memory that I'll never live up to. I mean, great professors. Even Orestes Brownson, I mean, he was very nice to compliment me on that undergraduate essay, but this guy wrote these many books. So I've done very little as compared with Brownson or Perry Miller, but probably more than one of my mentors. But one of my mentors wrote a book that changed history, colonial history. So I don't think I've done, in fact, I know I haven't done anything of that traumatic. The other thing is, as an academic leader, popular culture, I took a magazine, Film and History, which was $8,000 in debt, had a tax rebate, got it out of date, started up, and now it's a flourishing publication, Film & History, Film and History, an interdisciplinary journal of film and television studies. And it's on Muse, M-U-S-E, which is one of the big high-octane internet resource providers, also at EBSCO and others. We know from statistics that Film and History is read by at least 50,000 people when it comes out electronically. It's a much smaller hard copy subscription, but every research library in the country, including OSU, gets the journal. But 50,000 people. So that's my legacy. I brought it up to that. With the help of my dear wife, I put together a proposal and had offers, or tentative offers, from 4 major schools in the country to put Film and History there, and ended up going to University of Wisconsin. Easy for you to say. University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. And they're going to actually put together a Film and History building sometime in the next 5 or 10 years. And they will have conferences there. They already had a conference this fall in Chicago with 450 speakers. So that's off on its own, going on its own. I started the regional popular culture organization on my own. Then I was joined by a former student, Michael Schernick. He's a professor at Texas Tech. And we passed that on to 2 young scholars, and they're carrying it on. And they meet in Albuquerque every year, and that's totally without my help now. One of the things I learned, I won't mention any names, one thing I learned about leaders, they stay too long. And one of the typical issues is getting the system set up and the people set up to carry on when you are gone. And so in both Film and History and in Southwest, where I was directly involved, that's happened. So they can live without me. In fact, sometimes I resent the fact that they feel that they can live with that.
The life's going to go on without you.
Yeah. Status anxiety.
Well,
I've got time for one more question.
okay, and that brings you my concluding question.
It's good.
Good time.
Okay.
I was going to ask you what, tell us about your bucket list. I mean, you're retired now, and what are some of the things that are important to you now, sort of on the back end of your career, looking at that you're doing?
Well, I worked for 2 years with the help of some help from the English department, and but 2 years, and put together a CD-ROM called the Benjamin Lee Whorf Legacy. Now, Whorf is a person on whom I wrote my dissertation. He was a linguist who was very much into the conflict of science and religion in the 1920s. Wrote a novel and hoped to get involved in a debate with Mencken, and the novel wasn't published. So I had access to his papers, which were later destroyed by somebody. And Yale has some of them, and I have many that they did not. Well, I saved them, and I saved them, and I saved them. Finally, I did a CD-ROM of his papers that were given to me by the wife. My dissertation. I had a book I wrote on Whorf. I had various articles on Whorf. All those are on a CD that's word searchable. It's called The Legacy, but now this has already been purchased by Harvard, Chicago, Michigan State, and hope others, but my goal here is to get them in research libraries so that others can do research on Benjamin Lee Whorf. A person about whom, when I went on job interviews, the people would say, who? Who? They'd say, is he related to Richard Whorf? Richard Whorf is a Hollywood actor. It was his brother. But in any case, that's one. I finished this Why We Fought, America's Wars as Film and History. It was just picked this month as one of the top 15 books on film by Choice Magazine, a publication of the American Library Association. And that's a big deal. And the publisher has been approached in the last 2 weeks by the History Book Club to consider it for as an offering from the History Book Club, which is, in terms of popular readership, that's a big deal.
And this is all in retirement?
Yeah.
Quote, unquote.
Yeah. But I love and live that role as professor. It's what I am. And it's every moment is joyful, and sometimes I have to bark like a dog to tell people to leave me alone so I can continue to do it. If you work at home, people assume you don't have anything to do. I'm serious. And I learned to cope with that a long time ago. But if you work in your house and they can call you up, would you watch the dog for me? Would you take the cat out at 3? And let's go to lunch and stuff like this. And I've certain set work hours. And just don't answer the phone often. Although I always answer when you call. And I'm 400 because I'm going in for open heart surgery. So I finished my selected writings. I've been working on that for 2 years. Got that done, 600 pages. Got it into a publisher. They're distributing it to jurors. So I'm being operated on. They'll be evaluated. And then if I live through the operation, which I'm hoping to do, come back out, we'll polish it up, which were published in disparate places. I started some magazines that failed, Vietnam Veterans Institute Journal, and I had, I don't know how many, 5 issues, and then I left the organization and just went downhill. Or they chose not to carry on to do it. They did other things. They had dances and so on for veterans, which are good too. But in any case, now if I live through this operation, which I assume I will, I'm set free a little bit, and I've got a lot of things that I always wanted to do that I haven't done. I always want to go back and reread Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Now, I've already done that.
Wow.
And I also you can get it on tape. And there were 2 British actors, really. The distinguished attribution of the metaphoric polysyllabic. So I just love like you can put in the car and I'm driving along listening to the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And here's a question for you. According to Gibbon, what was the key development in Roman history that brought down the Roman Empire?
I got to tell you, it's been so long.
Well, no, there's no reason, I'd forgotten.
I've forgotten, I'm sorry.
It was the removal of the Praetorian Guards from the provinces and putting the Praetorian Guard as a unit in Rome.
Mhm.
And eventually they ended up picking who was in charge in the Senate, murdering those, gave them a hard time and so on. So it's a real lesson in the
Yeah.
over-centralization of power,
Uh,
which the people who wrote the Federalist Papers knew a lot about and tried to. They said you couldn't avoid faction, but you could try to structure a government that would limit the impact.
Peter, appreciate it. I know it's been a long interview. For just give you one last question, if you want to speak to. Is there anything else we haven't covered that you'd like to say that for us to record as we're talking here today? Any final
Well,
thoughts?
I would like to reiterate, since I've said it 3 times now, I'm reiterating that the Edmund Law Library was a wonderful workbench for me, and what deficiencies it had by virtue of the collection were more than made up for by the creative and self-starting initiative of librarians, the humanities librarians with whom I worked. I'm enormously grateful for that. And as Mr. Bassford, Terry Bassford, 1S, told me, and my graduate students once, that the 45 made everybody equal on the frontier, and interlibrary loan made every scholar equal worldwide. And our interlibrary loan services have always been terrific. You can now order them over the internet. So what we lack maybe in our core collection is made up for by the initiative and services that the library has worked out with that big collection in Chicago. And so I'm eternally grateful to the library as a workbench. And honestly, a craftsman has to have a workbench. Well, I had one. The Edmund Law Library.
Thank you,
Okay,
Peter.
pal.
Appreciate it very much.